Hello, and welcome to part 2 of Contest Dynamics. My name is Caleb Rothy, and I'm the Percussion Education Coordinator for WGI. In this part, what I thought we would do is talk a little bit about contest dynamics and how that may affect your score and your rating from week to week. So maybe taking a look at not just how did I do in this particular day, but how is my score developing over the course of the season? Or if maybe we're in a scenario where we've got Team A and Team B and they're competing head to head, how Team A may be the stronger group at one event, and then those results may flip a week later or a couple of weeks later. So the first thing that we should do and talk about in here is the most obvious one, and that's that over the course of the season, our programs are still in development. Even once we finish the show, we're still refining, we're still clarifying, we're still tweaking, we're still making changes to the way that the performance is going to be presented on the floor. If not content changes, then certainly performance communication changes, and then even mixing changes, things like emphasizing certain aspects and de-emphasizing other aspects. So while this is a work in progress over the course of the season, we can expect results to change quite a bit from week to week. Most of the time there's an assumption, I guess, that our score is going to trend up and trend better, and I think that's the case for most instances, while maybe not always being the case, and I'd like to talk about that a little bit. So obviously as we're developing the program, as we're getting more content out there on the floor, more of the production out there on the floor, as we're bringing greater clarity to what the intent of that production is, as the students are working on their performance skills and their communication skills, the performance is going to change dramatically week to week to week. The second thing that I'd like to talk about, and this one is a little bit less obvious, is the venues that we compete in. I think it's really important that we be aware of this, both as educators ourselves, those that are probably highly competitive and want to be very successful when we go to a contest, but also that we be aware of it as educators as something to share to our performers. So the venues will play a huge factor in the way that our show reads. You may have a performance in one particular venue on one particular weekend, and it may read one way, and then if we change that venue, if that becomes the variable a week later, the show may read completely different. In the past video, we talked about how you can have the exact same panel, the exact same venue, and everything be exactly the same, and the performance of the students may cause a great deal of variance in the score. For a minute, let's assume that your students perform exactly the same on the first week and then exactly the same on the second week. There's not a single difference in that performance. One would probably expect the score in those two performances to be identical, and that's never going to be the case because the venues themselves are going to factor in quite a bit. So here are some of the things that play a role in that. First of all, the acoustics of the venue. You may be in a gym that is really, really dry. We can hear everything. There's a great sense of transparency to the presentation, in which case we may be hearing a lot of flaws and a lot of errors that in another venue may be a little bit more covered up. Switch that. Let's go to the other extreme. Now we're in a big, boomy, boxy gym that's resonating like crazy, and all of a sudden now some of the errors are covered up, but the score of the presentation itself loses a little bit of its sense of clarity, its sense of transparency, and so the show just doesn't read the same way. That may be an advantage for Team A, and it may be a disadvantage for Team B, depending on which venue it is and depending on how their show works in that. So acoustics are going to play a huge difference in the way that our score may change and our show. Scores aside for a second, the way that the show may read to an audience or to an adjudicator week to week. The other thing that could factor into quite a bit is lighting. The lighting is never the same in any one of these venues, so the color design of your floor may pop very differently, and props and costume may pop very differently and read very differently in one venue than it will in another venue, and that's going to give your show, while it may be assumed to be kind of a minor consideration, it's really going to give you a different sheen, a different impression to that particular performance, especially depending on how much of your program and vehicle is tied to those things. The lighting may be such that we can't read the facial expressions and the communication skills from the performers as much in one particular venue as we do in another one, so that'll affect it quite a bit. The last thing is going to be seating and vantage points and things like that. If we're in a giant, let's say a really large high school gym, but it's not well populated, that may make the show read very differently than being in a much smaller gym or a densely packed gym in terms of spectators. and other performers that are watching and viewing that performance. But also then the seating position of the adjudicator themselves. If they're sitting really high, the show may read one way. Sitting really low in a much smaller venue, it may read a very different way. So it's just important to understand, even if you were able to get your performers to be 100% consistent, that as soon as you change from venue to venue, there are going to be things like acoustics and lighting and seating that's going to influence the way that show comes to life, the way your program really kind of manifests itself in those different spaces. The next thing that I'd like to talk about a little bit is the change, obviously, just in adjudication panels. While it would be great for there to be a national linear scale where there's one number means one thing and everybody can always agree and be in sync on that number, that's highly impractical and something we'll probably talk about at another point. But even if that were possible, let's assume for a second that it is. What that doesn't account for is the background of the adjudicators themselves, the background of the audience members themselves. The way that I like to explain this frequently is if you pick thematic material or programmatic material in your show, that may resonate very differently with one population that may be viewing the show and may not resonate quite so much with another population. So if you're doing a program about a cancer survivor and there is a audience member that has personal history with that, obviously that show's going to mean something different to them than it will to other people. And that's not just going to be the spectators that are watching the performance, but that also translates to the adjudicators as well. That is something I can say for our activity that we embrace. We don't try to shy away from that. We would never expect our audiences or adjudicators to be robots and to be completely uninfluenced by any of those things that you're bringing to the table. If you're bringing emotional material to the table and it has a particular response and strikes a particular chord with somebody, we want them responding to that. And it's something that we openly embrace as just a part of the indoor percussion activity, that your performance may resonate with some differently than it resonates with others. And that's not something we're going to obscure. It's something we actually embrace as a part of the creative process, a part of the challenge of artistry and creativity. The last thing that I'd like to discuss in this one is that frequently when I get a chance to talk to instructors, they expect that every time they perform, it will be a better score than it was the previous time. That, hey, we performed last week, we scored a whatever. We rehearsed for we rehearsed this whole week, so we had 2 rehearsals. They were both 3 hours apiece. We got 6 hours better this week, and I went to the event, and my score went down. Well, again, let's strip away as many variables as possible. Let's pretend you're in the exact same gym, and you've got the same adjudication panel. So we've eliminated all the venue and the audience member considerations. That may not necessarily translate to a higher score. You may have worked for an entire week on a bunch of things that made the program better, but not in a perceivable way when it comes to the numeric considerations. Sometimes you may have fixed some things before that were not problematic to the show, or at least not problematic in the way that they dramatically influenced the score and the ranking and the rating process previously. You may rehearse for an entire week and have gotten better during that rehearsal and may come to the event, and just through the variance of the performers, they may not bring the same level of performance that you'd worked on in rehearsal all week to bear at that performance, and so the score may dip or may change. It may go up dramatically. Maybe you had a great killer week of rehearsal, and so the score jumps a whole lot, and then we kind of plateau. We kind of get to this point where the program is maxed out, the performance of the program is maxed out, and it may not get a whole lot better. It may be upper box 4, but it may not be something that's going to grow into a lower box 5 number at some point. It may just plateau right there at the upper box 4 level. So there's no, sometimes there's this expectation almost that, every time we perform, every 2 weeks we should go up 2 points, every week we go up 2 points, whatever the case may be. There is no projection system that we use. There is no expectation that the more you do it, the higher your score is naturally going to grow in one of these things. And the last thing I'd like to mention is that frequently lots of people talk to me about, well, we didn't have a complete show last week, and so we came out this week and we've got a complete show. Our score is definitely going to go up. It's probably going to get 8 points higher because now the whole show's out there. It may. A lot of the time it does. Finishing your vision is a huge factor in completing a lot of the considerations that are on the sheets. I will tell you, though, that I definitely have seen programs that were really good, incomplete, but really good, and then they were finished off, and it actually diminished the quality of the show. We added on more content that made the totality of the program more confusing. It eliminated some of the clarity of thought and clarity of intent that we had before, and it obscured maybe the larger message that we were trying to bring to life with the performance. Or we added content out there, and before our level of achievement with the content that we had was really strong, but now we've added new content, and the performers are really struggling with some of those responsibilities. So in totality, when you look at the performance, it seems like a less polished presentation than we had the week before. So just make sure that you pay heed to some of the ways in which your score may vary from week to week. Typically, they trend better. Your score will trend up as the season develops. It may trend up in uneven patterns. That is to be expected. It may sometimes not trend up, and that may not be a function of a poor read from one adjudicator one week and a poor read on a different week. It may be a function of the content isn't as clear as we'd like it to be yet, the venue didn't work as well for your program as we'd like it to be, or the background of your show just resonated differently with a different population at the last performance. All right, I hope once again that you'll take some of these ideas back and share them with your students, those that are pertinent and relevant to them, but also something that I hope you as the educators will reflect upon and think about a little bit, and just when you attend your next event, be mindful of all those things. When you take a look at your score and you take a look at your, the competitive outcome, that you that you give yourself a little bit of chance to think about all these different factors that may play into it and may influence it a little bit. It really goes to help in understanding the bigger picture of how the whole process works much better. All right, thank you very much for spending a little bit of time with me. We'll talk to you again later.